The very name Colombia conjures images of gunfire, car bombs, drug barons and cartels. Yet amid the terror of the drug wars, this Latin American nation with a major stake in the Amazon rainforest appears to have pioneered a way of saving it. The solution is simple: hand the forest over to the very people who've always lived there, whose way of life is dependent upon its preservation. An area of rainforest the size of Britain has now been returned to the indigenous Yacuna Indians. It's all in stark contrast to Brazil, where the Indians have been thrown out of the forest in favour of settlers who demolish it. South America is now under intense international pressure to halt further destruction. The 4 countries covered by rainforest are now adopting vastly different policies. But with Brazil continuing to industrialise along the Amazon basin, it's in Colombia that the forest has the best chance of surviving. Sonia Roosler travelled down the Pirana River, which runs through the rainforest. She reports now on how the meek have inherited the earth deep in the heart of Colombia.
Millions of years ago, the whole world was covered by rainforests. Now this is the most fragile forest of all, the most threatened and the least understood. Here in Colombia, the Amazon forests survive, protected from settlers by fierce natural barriers. It's as if time had stood still for 2 million years. Only 3,000 years ago, the first Indian settlers arrived. Since then, they've learned how to live in the forest and live from it, without destroying the world they depend on. The acai palm tree yields fruit once a year. It's a delicacy. They eat the berries and brew them into alcohol. He told me it tastes good. The forests are flooded half the year. These waters will one day reach the Atlantic Ocean, winding their way for nearly 2,000 miles to the east, a journey as old as the continent. We've now been travelling for 3 days into the Colombian Amazon. What's unique about the forest around us is that it belongs to the Indians who live in it. The deal is that they've been given land titles to own the land collectively, but they can't sell it or mortgage it, and they must use the land as they always have done, protecting the forest and the rivers. Life for the Yacuna Indians centers around the maloca, the headman's house, a communal space where everyone gathers to cook, eat meals and to sleep. Things aren't owned, they're simply used as needed, and daily chores are shared. Families are large, yet the whole community takes care of the children. And guests are always welcome. All their food comes from the forest. Boiled caterpillar is one favourite snack. The Yacuna may have adopted some trappings of our society: T-shirts, Japanese watches, aluminium pots and pans. But fundamentally, it's a traditional life in the forest. "500 miles and a world away is Bogotá, built by the Spanish conquistadors to rule over Colombia." Martin von Hildebrand, an anthropologist who's the head of the government's Indian affairs, explains how they handed back the forests to the Indians.
What was done in the Amazon is that since they have inhabited this area, and since this land was never conquered by the Spanish crown, and Colombia inherited what the Spanish conquered, this land has always belonged to the Indians, and by the Colombian High Court of Justice, it is recognized that it never belonged as property to the state. It always has been Indian land. And consequently, what the government does is recognize and give Indians titles over their land. It's fundamentally a recognition, a legal recognition, by giving them a title, say, now this is yours, you have a piece of paper to prove it.
President Virgilio Barco signed away the largest Indian territory 2 years ago. It was a symbolic ceremony, recognizing Indian culture as the only one that would preserve the forest for future generations. 1/4 of the country is now Indian land, each tribe owning the parts of the forest they use. For hours, we flew seeing nothing but the occasional river and untouched rainforest. In all, the governments handed back an area larger than Great Britain, a total of 18 million hectares. After flying for 3 hours, the radar failed. Then we lost radio contact, and all we were left with was this crude chart covered with scribbled corrections. And neither pilot was quite sure if we were still on course. We were trying to find a landmark close to the Brazilian border, the rapids on the river Caquetá, one of the Amazon tributaries. Eventually we found them. Down below us was one of the first Indian territories. The river was swollen with thousands of tons of water forcing their way between the rocks. Ignoring the danger, the Indians were fishing, some with hook and line. They told us the river was 30 feet higher than usual, the best time of year for a good catch. It may look as if they're pulling them in as fast as they can without any care for dwindling stocks or threatened species. But this is the high season for fishing. It's forbidden when the river's low, because fishing, like hunting, is governed by strict tribal rules laid down by the elders. The Indians believe that all living beings have guardian spirits, and no species of plant or animal can be harmed without incurring their wrath.
The forest is like a mother to us, and we feel we must treat her with care and respect. The white man, though, has no pity, even while he's cutting her down.
It's a respect born out of knowledge of the power in each plant. This ordinary-looking leaf is in fact a deadly poison, barbasco. One poison arrow could kill a man. Young Leonardo showed us how he used it for hunting, with startling precision. And that night's dinner was brought down by a single arrow at a range of about 60 yards. Meanwhile, the women work in the fields. This smouldering acre will be planted to feed the whole village. It's a careful system of crop rotation. 7 years ago, this was forest. It was cleared and cultivated for 2 seasons, the longest these infertile soils can yield a good return. Afterwards, it was left fallow for the soils to recover. The forest took over, and now, 4 years later, the new trees are being chopped up for firewood. The field will now be cultivated for another 2 years, and then abandoned to the forest forever. Their staple crop is cassava, a white flour that provides more bulk than nourishment. It's women's work, and the whole process takes hours. Cassava's a potato-like root. Once it's been dug up from the fields, it's cleaned and grated into a pulp. One woman alone would take all day to cook cassava bread, so even the young girls have to help. Once grated, every drop of poisonous juice must be squeezed out. The grand finale is this jumbo-sized pancake. And tomorrow they'll have to start all over again. The Yukuna are trying to keep their ancient rituals alive. They want the next generation to hold on to their heritage, their identity, and their knowledge of the forest. And the young are curious learners. Only men perform sacred dances. We weren't allowed to film them. But this is end of term. A chance for the boys to show off. This week they've been learning the harvest dance in time for the pineapple crop. It's not just dances and rituals. They're now starting their own schools, aware that without their own education, these children will inherit the forests, but may no longer respect them.
The difference between the Indian and a colonizer is that the colonizer wants to leave a bank account for his children. He wants to leave some money for his children. The Indian wants to leave trees and animals for his children. We believe that they will be able to, that the forest will survive in their hands because of their knowledge, because they really know the forest more than any of us, because they've lived with it, because they have the right attitude towards the forest. And then the other point, if we're talking of 18, 20 million hectares, the size of England, to defend that, we would need an army of government employees, which we wouldn't be able to get and which we wouldn't be able to handle. If we have 55,000 Indians with their different cultures, supported by the government, respected, and believing both in their forest and believing in their own culture, our possibilities that the forest will survive are much greater.
Si no había resguardo, no había respeto.
If it wasn't ours, no one would respect it. That's what's happening in other countries like Brazil, where they build roads, bring in settlers, and throw out the Indians.
Porque si no había resguardo.
For the Indians, there's never been an easy path to freedom, but in Colombia at least, the law is on their side. Elsewhere, every day one animal or plant species disappears forever from the rainforests. And even here, they could still be in danger. This may be Indian land, but no one knows what would happen if, say, oil was discovered here. Yet even so, if the rainforests are to live on, there has to be a way through the tangle of conflicting interests. Returning the land to the Indians is only a beginning, but at least it's now in the hands of those whose very survival depends on the forest. Sonia Rusla, ITN, on the Colombian Amazon.